Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with the New American Magazine, and we are joined once more by Bert Schlossberg. He is one of the top researchers, if not the most knowledgeable man on Flight KAL 007. We interviewed him not long ago, but there was just so much there. We thought we need to bring him back and go a little deeper. It's such a huge issue. Right now, we have a president in the White House who would probably be more favorably inclined to investigating this issue again. A lot of Americans still remember this. Back in 1983, the Soviet Union shot down an airplane filled with passengers. It was a passenger airline, KAL, Korean Airlines 007. And on that plane was Congressman Larry McDonald. He was an unstoppable conservative congressman. I just had the pleasure of meeting his son, Larry McDonald Jr., over the weekend. Incredible young man, and a lot of people said that Larry McDonald might have been on his path to the White House. He was just incredibly popular. He was very well respected by people on both sides of the aisle. I think over 200 members of Congress came to his funeral, is my understanding. I was in his district not long ago. Just a wonderful, all around great guy. He was, as I mentioned, the chairman of the John Birch Society. He was involved with the Western Goals Foundation that was helping to kind of gather information that would be necessary to preserve freedom. And then the Soviet Union shot his airplane down in a horrifying tragedy. And the official story was that everybody died, nothing to see here, move along, sorry guys, that's it. But according to Mr. Schlossberg, there's a lot more to the story. Bert, thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me again. It's good to see you.
Hey, it's great to have you here. So, Bert, we talked a little bit about last time some of what you believe happened, but I wanted to go a little deeper. You have really studied this issue very carefully of what happened to that plane after the Soviet fighter jet launched that missile. Tell us a little bit about what you think happened and why. What happened with the plane? Did it land? Officially it just exploded, but give us some insight into what happened and why you think that happened.
Okay, I'd like to start a little bit before the attack upon the plane because that's important to see what led up to it, and also to see a little bit from the viewpoint of the people in the plane. It's possible to see what was going on in the plane because of the cockpit voice recorder recording the flight crew and what they thought was going on in the back of the plane. Okay, first of all, we'll take it a little bit before the missiles were launched. And the people were relaxing in the plane. The first class in which Larry sat and at row 2B. There were very few people in that first class, but the cabin in which most of the people were found was about three-quarters full. They had just finished eating their au gratin meal and had seen the movie of the week. And that movie that was being presented that night was A Man and a Woman, a French production. And I don't know what's the intention to serve au gratin at the same time, that seeing the movie of a man and a woman. When all of a sudden there came into the cockpit voice recorder, and that cockpit voice recorder, of course, is one of the two boxes of what's commonly called the black box, came into the sound, the cockpit voice recorder, the sound of a dull thud. Now that's really amazing because here the plane should have been, according to the media, that should have been broken up. And you remember the Time magazine picture of an artist's conception of the plane breaking up and the Soviet interceptor flying away from it, very, very close to it, and everything was in planes, and the plane was all broken in two main pieces with flames all around it. That's a picture that the media uh, received. But that's not what happened. And you can tell by what's happened by the reaction of the pilot and the co-pilot. Captain Shun Byung-in uh, says out loud, and we hear it, and we can imagine him turning to the co-pilot, "What was that?" So he's not even sure what it was at the time that the detonation took place of the missile. And his co-pilot, first officer co-pilot Dong, uh, replies to him, "What?" So they didn't even know what had happened, but it certainly was not a cataclysmic explosion. And what had happened that caused that was a detonation of a missile. The Soviet interceptor, the Sukhoi 15 Flagon, had come up to the side of the plane because the plane had slowed down as it was ascending. It had received permission to ascend to 35,000 feet, and so and it was at 33,000 feet, and so it slowed down because power was being shifted to altitude rather than to velocity. And the pilot of the Sukhoi plane could not slow down, and he recorded that fact to his combat controller, and went up and was at the side of the captain, looked over and saw the plane, and would later remark that he knew it was a civilian plane because he was that close to it. And at that time, the 747, Boeing 747, was the only in the uh, uh, commercial aviation version. It was the Boeing 707 200 series with the bump on the top, or it was very obvious that it was a civilian plane. But the pilot remarked in an interview that he knew it was a civilian plane because of the two rows of windows. So he knew what plane he was about to be attacked. He slid past that plane, circled around, and got permission from the combat controller, his combat controller, Lieutenant Colonel Titolvin, to take a shot, to take two shots actually with his missiles. So he did that. He pulled back and underneath, and when he was about 8 kilometers away, and that's about 4 and something miles away, he took aim and he set off two missiles. One of them, both missiles were an Anab missile, which was a air-to-air missile, medium range. One was a proximity fuse. It was not to explode at the object of the target. It was to explode 50 meters behind the target and spew forth its shrapnel, and that was supposed to bring down the target, whatever it was. So that was one missile, the proximity fuse missile, and the second missile was a heat-seeking missile. A heat-seeking missile, the target of that is one of the engines. That's the heat of the engine. Okay, now what had happened then? They were in their reclining position. Larry McDonald was at the front seat, and the meal was finished, and so was the movie, and they were just, most of them were getting ready to sleep. It was 6:26 in the morning, and that is not dark. That is not night. That is pre-dawn. That is what it was at that time. Pre-dawn is the time that the light is just beginning to filter in. And so the pilot of the Sukhoi 15 actually was able to see what kind of a plane it was, and he shot off these two missiles. And the pilot and the co-pilot returned to each other and said, "What was that? So far different than the media portrayed it." Well, the plane then took a turn upward. Why it took it upward is because one of the cables of the stabilizer was unraveled by the missile, and it went up, and the pilot and co-pilot attempt to take it down, and it makes an arc. It goes from 35,000 feet to 38,000 feet before the captain gets control of the plane. But it's also easy to see once we have the documents, and finally the Russians, who had lied and said that they did not have that they did not find the plane and they did not find the black boxes. Finally, 8 years later, because of pressure being put upon them, most of the pressure having come from Senator Jesse Helms, to fork over all the material, the military material, the black boxes, anything that they had, and also the description of the concentration camps at the passengers. All this was presented to Boris Yeltsin, and we got the goods to see what was going on. Though that missile that was proximity fuse, of course, didn't hit the target, but it did do what it was designed to do, explode 50 miles behind. The missile that was a heat-seeking missile missed completely. And we know that because of the conversation going on with the pilot and the second officer, first officer, and the first officer reports all engines normal, sir." And he repeats that twice in the conversation. So none of the missiles, the engines were harmed. Okay, so air began to rush out of the cabin because of the pockmarks of the shrapnel. And how big were those pockmarks? First of all, they were so small that nobody could be sucked out of the cabin. It was estimated that it was, if you put all the pockmarks together of the openings in the fuselage, and most of the fuselages of them were shot coming up to the cargo area where there was no passengers, it would have been only 1 3/4 feet of any kind of a piercing of the fuselage. And ICAO, that is the International Civil Aviation Organization of the United Nations, who got this material, got the black boxes finally after 8 years of lying, determined that the sound of the alarm of air escaping from the cabin, the sound of that alarm occurred 11 seconds after the missile was fired. And according to the sound that entered into the cockpit voice recorder. Okay, so that was 11 seconds of it. And the oxygen mask had already deployed. And the report points out that the captain himself had began to breathe in an accentuated way because he was wearing the oxygen mask. So finally, the captain was succeeded in bringing down the KL-007 after an arc of 113 seconds, and he brought it down gradually. The plane did not explode. There was no harm to it. He had control at the point going below slightly the altitude that it was at the start of the attack. And then he brought it up sharply for 10 seconds. And this is all that we have all this evidence of it. He was in full control and controlled it enough to bring it up to the original altitude and then begin a very steady descent. Okay, at that point, the passengers were all conscious. They were sitting. Even the incline going up of the ascent was not more than 15 degrees. So it might have been that something would have slipped off the tray, but the people would be holding on, if any were standing up at that point. And then the ground facilities of the Soviets had the ground facilities on the great island of Sakhalin and on the Siberian coastline and on ships. And we have gotten the transcripts, not me, but the people that were involved in getting this type stuff, which I'm reporting, were able to get the transcripts of what they saw on their radar scope. And we can follow the plane as it traveled after the attack for 9 minutes. Okay, now this is a point that we could have to point. It was flying at 9 minutes at a steady altitude, which happened to be 5,000 meters, which is 16,404 feet. 16,400 feet, flying steadily for after the attack until it got over an island, a small island called Moniron. Okay, so the passengers were conscious during this time. The plane was in control, and then very shortly after the attack of these of the Sukhoi 15 Flagon interceptor, very shortly after that, KAL-007 made a turn to the right. And this is very, very notable. And these little things you pay attention to when this happens and why it happens. If it had not turned to the right, it would have continued on its heading that it was on. And that heading was at 240 degrees. That is a heading that takes it southwest of the point that it entered into the area, 240 degrees. And if it had continued on 240 degrees and had not made the turn to the right, that is to the north, It would have gone south of that small island, but it did not remain at a 240 degree. It turned to the right, and after 9 minutes, that took it over a small island called the Moniron. If it had not made that turn, it would not have hit Moniron. And we have the full testimony of the from different sources, really, of that turn and of it being over Moniron Island. So that showed an intentionality. It showed an intentionality that they intended to make that turn in order to take it over Moniron Island. And I might add at this point, to give the fuller picture, that Moniron Island, which is just 3.5 by 4.5 miles long, is the only land point in the whole Tartar Straits between Siberia and Sakhalin Island, which is the bigger island. The only place that there could have been a safe landing, a search for a harbor, a search to take the water, a water ditching to bring safety to the people, since the pilot had judged that he could not make Japan and he did not want to land in the Soviet island of Sakhalin, which was heavily fortified and militarized. It had to be a water ditching, and he had located the exact place to do it. Okay, so as the
You have some
plane,
pictures of this, right, Bert? Do you want us to throw any up on the screen yet?
yeah, can we take a picture of that island? That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a picture of the island. That's Moniron Island. See it? That's 3.5 by 4.5 miles. And can we get a picture of Larry McDonald again to show him what he looked like? There's Larry McDonald, and he was seated at Congressman Larry McDonald was seated at 2B on the left-hand side of the plane, one of the few people in first class. But behind him at the 7th row and the 8th row was the Grenfell family. If we could turn now and see the Grenfell family. And now the reason why I want to show them both in confluence is that these are the only two people that we have what I had now will call the proof, which I had before this point had called heavily determined evidence of their existence, of their survival. And the little girl on the right-hand side at the bottom, that's Noel Ann Granville, and she has been located at the medical school number 3. She was taken to about a Vostok, which is a couple of hundred miles a point south, and then she was taken to medical school in another location, and was identified by the director of that school as being a student, there. And of course, the Soviets used to take the very young children and train them for their future. Okay, Larry McDonald, I spoke about his itinerary after his abduction last week, and I'm not going to speak about that aspect now. But I want to continue the trip that we are making now to Moniron Island, and this trip was followed completely by Soviet radar from different points. Now, if you can take up the photo of the Marshal Ogarkov at his press conference, there he is. General Ogarkov was the chief of staff. He was the deviser of what's called Maskirovka, which is the Soviet deception against the United States, and he had other functions, but he's one of the top people. And here he is at his press conference, lying and saying they have no idea where the plane went down, and this is the whole fabrication of a military attack, military espionage of the United States, when in fact the Soviet Union was following this. And we now have the transcripts that, because I think, and I'm almost sure that because of it, it's of Jesse Helms' pressure on Boris Yeltsin, we have the actual transcripts showing the flight of that plane. And the thing I want to note about is 3 times that General Kornyakov. Now, if we can have the picture of the Soviet General Kornyakov, This is Anatoly Kornyukov, the commander, general commander of Sokol Air Force Base, that was in charge of this whole operation of the shoot down and other things that were related to KL-007. General Kornyukov asked his subordinates, and the main subordinate this time was Lieutenant Colonel Gerasimenko. What is the altitude of the enemy? What is the altitude of the target? He knew all the time exactly where the plane was after the shoot down and on its way to Monument Island. And he was informed at each time where it was. And then finally, General Kornyukov says, where is it now? What is the altitude of the target? And what is the altitude of our fighters? They want to finish off KAL-007, and they had lost contact with it, and now he tries to get it back. And then he orders not only the Sukhoi 15, but the MiG-23, which had taken off from Smirnov Air Force Base in the center of Sakhalin Island. There was two different air bases that were central to the shoot down. So General Kornyukov tells us where the plane was. And Gerasimenko tells General Kornyukov, it is turning left. Then he sees it on the scope. The right, it is descending. And then General Kornyukov says, get it, send in the MiG-23, get it. You know where it is. It is now over Moniron, get it. He is losing his cool, definitely, at this plane. They want to kill what has been identified previously as a civilian airplane. Whether they think it was a civilian airplane that was commandeered for espionage purpose, who knows at this particular time. It is descending. So at 9 minutes after the attack, KAL-007 begins to descend. And it is descending at a very slow speed. This is the thing I want to emphasize at this point. It is not a plane that has been exploded and falls in pieces. If that had happened at the altitude that it was at, because of simulation of a plane dropping after being exploded at that particular altitude, the results would have been the plane smashing into the sea from 2 to 2.5 minutes. And that's the proof that a plane was flyable and was on its way. It was flyable and it was maneuverable because it made that turn to the right, to the north. And then finally, it is seen on the scopes making its spiral descent. Fishermen on the scene see the plane making either 2 or 3 circles, a spiral descent over the island of Moniron, this tiny, singular island in the part of the place. What happens then at that point? Well, just as we saw that there was intentionality in the plane in making that turn to the right to put it over Moniron the first time, another major incident occurs on the descent, and we don't know whether it's at the second spiral descent or the third spiral descent. We must see that this was all witnessed by the passengers who were still breathing through their mask, although at that time they might have taken it off because they might have needed it at 16,404 feet, which it started at, but now they were descending out at a lower altitude. And the question is, why was not a Mayday emergency distress on the frequency 121.5 megahertz? Why don't we have a Mayday? If it didn't explode and if they were still alive, why was there not a Mayday distress call? Well, as God would will it, I heard, since I'm a member of a family of people that were on the plane, my wife's father and cousin were on the plane. That night, I remember I heard a call. I heard a distress call, a bulletin being given. And then by the morning, everybody said the people had died. And we just accepted that fact until we found out otherwise in Israel, in the debriefing, in the research center's debriefing of Soviet material. I remember the May Day. Then a number of years ago, the proof of that came in. As the plane descended, the master controller of KABC in Los Angeles, that's ABC TV in Los Angeles, sent me a letter. See, by this time I had an address. It's a good thing to have an address of these things. So people that were involved can give you information that they have stored up and kept for many, many years. Remember, this is an incident that had happened 37 years ago. And he said that he was the master controller of KABC, and this had come in as a bulletin, a cut-in, and it was only played once because and then not played. But he says he knew the ABC's rules was that if the government had said don't do it because you're jeopardizing people, ABC pulled it off as a matter of policy and would never play it again. But I heard it that first night, and that was a conversation to me to continue on with this, that I was on the right track. And here is what the Mayday was. Here's what came out of that Korean Airlines, either on the second spiral or the third spiral. It said, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And of course, you would say Mayday for an emergency distress 3 times. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. KAL 007, descending 10,000 feet. We are ditching in the water. There's the intent. We are ditching in the water. I will never forget that. We are ditching in the water. The second great intent of the people of the plane and passengers all taken with the decision of Captain Chun Byung-in and his flight crew that the plane was damaged. It was not exploded, but it could make Japan. And they didn't want to make Sakhalin Island itself, which was heavily fortified. So they chose the only island that they could see coming up on the horizon to them, and they headed toward it. And now we are ditching in the sea. Well, I had the blessed experience with my wife of interviewing the people at the radar station that had followed this whole thing, the Soviet radar station. One man had come to Israel to become an immigrant when the Soviet Union opened up and the Jews could leave about this, and among them were Soviet military people. They had to be debriefed. And from the debriefing by Avraham Shifrin and Eleonora Shifrin, his wife, that were the directors of the Research Center for Prisons, Psych Prisons, and Forced Labor Concentration Camps of the USSR. It's quite a title, but that's exactly what it was. They had debriefed this first beginning news that they were survivors, and the first beginning news that the plane had been followed, and that the survival of the plane was likely with the pastors. Well, my wife and I asked for proof. Remember that we had already felt that they were dead, and now it was very, very hard to consider that they might not be dead and yet be in the Soviet gulag and prison camp or whatever horrible situation. And I remember us sitting at the Hilton Jerusalem Hotel in the coffee shop, and there before us was this officer, this young man who was worked in that Soviet, the Soviet radar station that had tracked it, and he said that he's not the only one that had tracked the plane to a safe landing. He was at Komsomolsk na Amur, the city of Komsomolsk on the Amur River, and they had tracked it until that plane descended to 1,000 feet above the surface of the sea. They could not track it further because of the curvature of the Earth. This is this line of sight radar. People had assumed, well, this is 12 minutes since the attack, and so we can't follow it anymore. And so it must have exploded. And they're all lost anyway. It exploded. Let's go on to better business. No, this says they could not track it because their radar could not go under that. He said not only that they could not track it at radar station 1845 at Komsomolsk, neither could the radar station at Yadinka. Yadinka was another one on the coast. And then we found out that not only did these two radar stations follow KL07 to the water ditching, but also the boats, the warships, the Soviet boats, the Coastal Guard boats under General Romanenko, they traced and followed this plane. And we found in Izvestia, the writings in Izvestia, one of these naval servicemen saying, we sped to the anticipated place of the set down at full speed, speaking of him and the other ships. So even before the plane got down on the water, there were ships that knew exactly. What a lie. General Nikolai Ogarkov foisted on the whole world, and the whole world unfortunately believed this lie, that the plane had exploded. And so there was no thought of there being survivors. So we see there in operation a cover-up, a damage control, and a cover-up, and a duplicity of the Soviet Union, which has never been called to a full account. The ferocity and the cruelness of this country at that point in time was tremendous and overpowering. And so KL7 was followed, and there before us at drinking coffee with us and trying to piece out the story in Hebrew and in English was this radar operator, and gesturing with his hands and giving the angle at the different altitudes that the plane was at, and the angle until he got to what they called point zero being 1,000 feet above the surface of the sea, and his hand straightened out my eyes, and that was the end of their tracking. They couldn't go anything lower. Well, Alex, to tell you the story, the plane did go beyond the 12 minutes, and it did land in the water. And we have the report of Admiral Sidorov, the commander of the Soviet fleet, not the Coastal Guard, but the whole commander of the Soviet fleet at that time, that ships within 15 minutes had reached where KL7 was on the water. Say KL07 did not sink immediately. And people were viewed coming out on the wings, much in the same way as later on, as you know, in what they call the miracle of the Hudson River, the plane landing and everything. This is what happened in 1983. People were starting to come out on the wings. And then the rescue boats came. And we have the orders for those rescue boats to come with the helicopters, which were ordered from two air bases in Sakhalin Island, the southern Sakhalin and the Khomutov civilian military southern airfield. The rescue copters were ordered. You know who? Because the Russian Federation, I think, was so much terrified of Jesse Helms that they gave all the material without yet confessing, we've got the people. They gave all the material that Jesse Helms had gotten, had asked for. And so there, picture it. You picture them, the airplane in the waters, and you picture the passengers in the airplane as they had gotten on the orders. You picture Larry McDonald sitting in first class, and the Grenfell family sitting behind him, and the other people bustling. What is to happen? Starting to go out in the wings of the of the airplane. And then we have the third eyewitness. And this is an electrical eyewitness. And this is contained in Senator Helms' report that he had made of this whole affair after having the CIA and the NSA verify the information. And they considered this as a proof or heavy evidence that KL had answered safely. And what it was is they had got the NSA electronic intercepts of the Soviet pilots, what they were saying to their ground station, and the conversation that was being held at the ground station. And the pilots initiated it when they looked down and they saw KLL-07 on the waters. And the report of Senator Helms goes on and says why they considered it as a valid sighting of the plane on the waters. They said because if the pilots from the air, there's no way that he could know what they were talking about. What they were talking about is that Americans were killed. Of course, some of them may have been killed from that detonating shrapnel. And now the Americans are going to blame us. And what a pity that we did not shoot the RC-135 reconnaissance plane. What a pity that we shot down this plane and we're going to be accused of killing Americans. So the report goes on. How could they know that it was Americans had been killed? They said from the plane, they could see that it was a Korean plane because they could see the logos of the Korean plane, which was at that time the bird, or the Roadrunner bird. After that, because of this event, it was switched to the yin yang logo. They could tell that it was a civilian plane because at that time there was no, because they could see the hump of the plane as it was resting on the water for that short time. So they would know that it's a civilian plane that they shot down. But they could not know that Americans had been killed in it, or that Americans were in it. They could not know that Americans were killed in it unless they heard from their radios the rescue going on and somebody saying that in the Soviet controlled coastal boats, or from the plane itself, or in the rafts which people were brought in. They must have heard this going on. So it's to the U.S. authorities. This was the proof that the plane had landed. Okay, so I'm just going to say, we've said, and then I'm going to conclude at this point, these passengers are people. Did you know that there were 69 passengers? There were 22 children under the age of 22. 22 children under the age of 22. 3 years old. The youngest was 6 months old, Sammy. And look at these. Here's just a portion of the people. Here's Sammy. Do you see that color picture at the near the bottom? That's
Yep.
Sammy. And so what they are now is that Sammy 6 months, and now 37. He's 37 years old, 6 months. Some of these people have been located. 2 of them have definitely been located. And that is the girl, Noelan Grenville, and of course, Larry McDonald. Now, do you see Larry McDonald? Take at the.
I do.
Yeah, you see Larry McDonald. And
Yep.
these are okay. And this girl just to the side, the little girl to the side of Larry. She's now been located. We don't know if she's alive. We think so because of an incident that had happened. But she's a Filipino girl. We didn't even know that she was Filipino. We thought she might have been a Korean. So different people. These are people. They left my families. There was thousands and thousands of people are represented in this. Is Mary in the top picture, the third to the right? That's Mary Hendricks. Well, okay. These are all. We present that to you. God has been my help. God has been our help. He's interested. He has never forgotten any of these people. And he works through history, through people, and he has an intent of love. And so we want to present somehow to take it to the next step. We have gotten, things are now showing up on Novelsk, the port of that very island, of the actual objects that were worn or held by the people of that flight. And you know that Moniron Island to Novelsk there's 41 miles of water, 41 miles of water. And yet there are cards that have shown up without water stains, without any sign having gone through water. Well, we know why that is. It's because those rescue involving the uh, uh, the helicopters, the coastal guard boats under the command of General Romanenko, and also in a call from the deputy commander of the whole Far East Military District, the deputy commander Strogoff. We have his transcripts of the call for the civilian trawlers that are around Moniron Island to go to Moniron Island. They didn't say the vicinity of Moniron Island. They said to Moniron Island for the rescue, which was followed by the abduction and the imprisonment of these people. It's all in there. What a lie we were told, that we believed or pretended to believe, as if there's nothing to be done. But God has not forgotten these people one instant. So just as I make this, I would make it to other people. If you know anybody in our government, if you know how to get something to President Trump, this is not going to. This does not require a pussycat and a gentle-tongued person to say nice things to get along. No, this is not going to get. We don't need that kind of people. So to get it to somebody, or if producers, media producers, video producers, anything that we can now present, now that proof is coming that there was a rescue, that what was said by the Research Center for Psych prisons and forced labor concentration camps of the USSR under the Schifrins, it was true what they said, though nobody would believe them at that time. The evidence is now coming up right before our eyes. And we have seen the port. We have a report from the prisoners were taken to Novelsk, the port city of Novelsk. We have a picture, we can present that picture now, of what it looked like. That is what the port of Novelsk on Sakhalin Island in 1983, this picture is from 1983, was looked like. And the woman in one of those buildings that looks out in the port told some of our people that one of our people that the KGB came to her office building and put black curtains on the office building so nobody can see out to the port what was happening that night. And if it was done to her building, it was done to the other buildings. There's few of them. It just doesn't look like that today, but that's what it looked like at that time. That was prevented from looking out and to see what was happening. What was happening was the patrol boats and the civilian trawlers bringing our people to the port of Novelsk. And among those people were two people, and there was a lot more than this, but two people did this, took their cards out of their purses, wherever they had it on their effect. And one of them was the vice president of Ingersoll Rand Company, a Korean man that traveled from the United States to back to Korea, to the United States, to back to Korea, and had his rental card. And he signed it with his name, and that was just recently presented to his family. Yes, that is the card. That's the card that he took with his name. And there was no water signs. There was a plastic card. Of course, there wouldn't be water signs, but in the part that was exposed, no water stains. And the other card was Sojae Sung. She was the designer, executive designer for the company that her husband was, and she and her husband were on that flight. And she got there. We don't know whether it was by rescue helicopter or whether it was by boat, but she got to the port of Novelsk. And then like the vice president of Ingersoll Rand, and we think many other people, she dropped her card to let people know I'm alive. And that card, if you take a look at that card, it's all cardboard. There is no sign of any water. It could only be gotten with the, perhaps brought up as she was getting out of the boat, jostled by the KGB that we know were ordered. We know that the KB, we have the order, the transcripts of the order given by General Strogoff, and she might have been jostled, and maybe the card dropped inadvertently. I don't think so. I think that they were then knowing really what was happening. They were brought from the plane, and afterwards, this is their only time. They had finally got to land. They started dropping things, and it had been kept. And you take a look at the card, you'll see there's no water stains. We had it magnified, and but on the side, it's the mark of people having fingered it. You see the dirt stain says, the dirt on the edges of the cards, and then on the right-hand side upper, you see a little, what they call a dog tag or dog, when you fold a little bit. People handled it, and he kept it for 37 years. Finally, it got into the hands of a person that contacted me. Again, that's the virtue of having a web page or some kind of address that people can to tell his story, and his story was a very amazing, heart-rending story. He died in May 26th, the year before last. Okay, Alex, I think that's about all I have to say, unless you have any questions.
Important topic. Folks, obviously, we have not been told the truth about what happened on KAL 007. Those were human beings. Many of those were Americans. One of them was a sitting member of Congress. It's completely unacceptable that humanity does not know the truth about this. So you just heard Bert explain. He's the author of the book Rescue 007. You can get even more evidence. If you can get this information to somebody who can do something with it, please do so. We need another investigation of this. I think that should be very, very clear at this point. We need to really get to the bottom of this. The people who were involved in this crime of epic proportions should be held accountable, and the victims who were tragically shot down on that airplane, they need justice, and the ones who are still alive, we need to track them down. Huge, huge issue. Tragic. I recognize that. But thank you guys for watching. Thank you, Bert, once again for sharing your insights with us. We really appreciate it. And folks, we'll be back with much more. Stay tuned to The New American. We'll keep bringing you this kind of information that is just crucial that you won't hear anywhere else. Thanks again for watching, and God bless.